New York never truly sleeps, but some nights it watches. The kind of night when the city feels tense, like it knows something is about to happen. That night was one of them. It was late, past midnight, when John Gotti stepped out of a black Cadillac in Brooklyn. The street was quiet, almost respectful. Neon signs flickered. A cold wind cut through the alleyways, carrying the smell of gasoline and old rain. Gotti adjusted his coat. He always did. Not because he was cold, but because he wanted the world to see him exactly the way he chose to be seen. Sharp, calm, untouchable. What he didn't see were the eyes watching from the shadows. 3 men, not amateurs, not kids chasing reputation. These were professionals, the kind who didn't talk, didn't panic, and didn't miss unless something went very wrong. They had been waiting for hours. They knew Gotti's schedule better than his own family did. They knew which streets he trusted, which corners he never checked. And tonight, they believed the legend was about to end. One of them whispered, "That's him." The other tightened his grip. This wasn't personal. It was business. The plan was simple. Too simple. Gotti would walk 10 steps. A car would roll slow. No noise. No witnesses. New York had swallowed bigger secrets before. The first movement came fast. A shadow shifted. A door creaked. Footsteps rushed. But something went wrong. John Gotti stopped walking. Not suddenly. Not in fear. He stopped like a man who felt something change in the air. Years in the streets do that to you. He turned his head slightly, just enough. And in that half second, instinct beat planning. A car horn blared. A passerby laughed too loudly. One of the gunmen hesitated. That hesitation saved a life. The moment exploded into chaos. Engines roared. Footsteps scattered. A window shattered somewhere down the block. And then, silence. John Gotti was still standing. Alive. Unharmed. And very aware of what had just almost happened. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't call for help. He looked down the street and smiled. What the gunmen didn't understand. They thought the night was the story. They were wrong. The night was just the warning. Because John Gotti didn't believe in revenge driven by anger. He believed in messages. And the most terrifying messages were calm. He returned home like nothing happened. Kissed his wife. Ate dinner. Not a single call was made. That silence traveled faster than any gunshot. By morning, rumors had already spread. Something had gone wrong. Someone had failed. And Gotti was still breathing. That scared people more than if he had been hurt. The next morning, when the FBI felt it, at 7:42 a.m., inside a federal building in Lower Manhattan, FBI agents gathered around a table. Coffee cups untouched. Faces serious. They had heard the whispers. A failed move. A near miss. A boss who should have been gone. One agent broke the silence. If he survived, he said, he's going to respond. They expected violence. They expected chaos. What they didn't expect was nothing. No retaliation. No street war. No bodies. Just movement. Quiet movement. Phones ringing. Meetings happening. People disappearing from social circles overnight. John Gotti had gone silent. And silence, in his world, meant something big was coming. The message without words. By noon, 3 men were no longer answering calls. Not missing. Not reported. Just gone. By evening, word reached the streets. Gotti had made his move. Not against the gunmen. Against the people who sent them. Contracts frozen. Alliances cut. Protection withdrawn. Men who once felt powerful suddenly felt naked. And the FBI realized something chilling. John Gotti wasn't reacting emotionally. He was restructuring power. One agent leaned back and said quietly, "This is worse than violence." He was right. Why this shocked the FBI? The Bureau had built profiles. They expected rage, impulsiveness, public retaliation. What they got was strategy. John Gotti used the failed attempt not to scare his enemies, but to expose them. By doing nothing publicly, he forced everyone involved to reveal themselves through fear. Calls made, meetings requested, mistakes committed, and the FBI watched it all unfold. One failed move had given Gotti something priceless. Control. This was only the beginning. Because what John Gotti did next didn't just shake the Mafia. It changed how the FBI hunted bosses forever. Silence is loud in the underworld. When phones stop ringing, when doors stop opening, when familiar faces suddenly avoid eye contact, that's when fear begins to breathe. John Gotti understood this better than anyone. The morning after the failed move, he didn't gather his men in a back room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand names. Instead, He did something far more dangerous. He waited. At the Rave Night Social Club, the door opened as usual. Espresso machines hissed. Chairs scraped the floor. Men laughed too loudly, pretending everything was normal. But everyone felt it. John Gotti sat in his chair, relaxed, perfectly dressed, saying almost nothing. And that terrified them, because when Gotti talked, you could read him. When he went quiet, you couldn't. The men who couldn't sleep. Across the city, 3 men stared at ceilings. They replayed the night again and again. The hesitation, the noise, the moment that slipped. They knew the rules. Failure wasn't forgiven. It was remembered. One of them packed a bag. Another called a contact who didn't answer. The third sat completely still, knowing movement itself could be a mistake. By the second night, all 3 had vanished from circulation. No sightings, no rumors, no whispers, just absence. And absence, in that world, spoke volumes. The FBI starts to worry. At FBI headquarters, agents stared at maps and transcripts. They had expected escalation, street-level chaos, visible retaliation, something they could respond to. Instead, the city went calm. Too calm. One senior agent tapped the table slowly. "This isn't restraint," he said. "This is confidence." Wiretaps picked up fragments. Men asking for meetings. Others canceling them. Sudden loyalty shifts. John Gotti wasn't cleaning up a problem. He was reorganizing the entire board. And the FBI realized something unsettling. This failed move had made him stronger. The message spreads without a word. Within days, everyone understood the new reality. No announcement was made. No warning was given. But doors closed. Men who once had protection suddenly didn't. Businesses lost backing. Allies became strangers. It wasn't punishment. It was isolation. And isolation in that world was a slow sentence. A Gambino associate whispered to another, barely moving his lips. "He knows who sent them." The other man didn't ask how. He didn't need to. Why no one dared to move? Normally, an incident like that would start a chain reaction. Countermoves. Power plays. Challenges. But no one moved. Because moving meant revealing yourself. And Gotti was watching. He let paranoia do the work for him. Men began doubting each other. Meetings became tense. Trust evaporated. And all John Gotti had done was survive. The FBI's unexpected problem. For the Bureau, this was a nightmare. There was no event to react to. No visible crime. No pressure point. One agent slammed a file shut. "He's not making mistakes," he said. "He's letting them make mistakes." And they were. Phone calls grew desperate. Voices cracked. Names slipped. The silence was breaking people. Not Gotti. A private conversation. Late one night, John Gotti finally spoke. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Just one sentence to one man. "Fear is cheaper than force." That was it. No follow-up. But that sentence traveled. And by the time it reached the streets, it had grown teeth. The city thought the danger had passed. But John Gotti wasn't finished. Because what came next wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure no one ever tried again. Revenge doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it simply rearranges the world around you. John Gotti understood that violence was loud. And loud things attract attention. What he wanted now was permanence. The city begins to shift. Within a week, subtle changes rippled through New York. A truck that usually arrived on time didn't. A supplier suddenly asked for cash instead of credit. A meeting place became unavailable without explanation. At first, people blamed coincidence. By the third time, no one did. Protection was being quietly withdrawn. Men who once walked confidently now checked behind them. Not because they feared an ambush, but because they feared abandonment. In the Mafia, losing protection was worse than being confronted. It meant you were already judged. The men who sent them panic. Somewhere in Queens, 2 men sat in a parked car long past midnight. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They both knew. The attempt hadn't just failed. It had exposed them. And John Gotti hadn't rushed. He had waited long enough for fear to ferment. One of them finally whispered, "He knows." The other nodded. "What do we do?" There was no answer. Because once John Gotti knew who you were, there was nothing left to do. Gotti makes his move, without touching anyone. The first real sign came quietly. A respected intermediary was told he was no longer welcome at certain tables. A long-standing arrangement was paused indefinitely. A favor that would normally be automatic was denied. No explanation, no warning, just distance. And distance, in that world, was lethal. Men began calling each other, asking questions they were afraid to ask. Have you heard from him? Did you get the message? Are we still good? No one was sure anymore. And that uncertainty spread faster than any act of force ever could. The FBI watches and can't intervene. Federal agents sat behind glass, listening. Wiretaps captured confusion, fear, paranoia, but nothing illegal. No direct orders. No explicit threats. John Gotti was operating in a gray zone, a place law enforcement hated. One agent muttered, "He's punishing people without committing a crime." Another replied, "That's worse," because it meant they couldn't stop it. The three gunmen, a final detail. Weeks later, a rumor surfaced. Not confirmation, not proof, just a whisper. The three men had been handled. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly. Their names stopped being mentioned. And when names disappear from conversation, it usually means they're not meant to be remembered. No bodies were found. No headlines followed. And that silence sealed the message. Why this retaliation was different. Old-school bosses relied on fear through force. John Gotti relied on fear through certainty. Certainty that he knew. Certainty that he remembered. Certainty that time was on his side. You could survive an explosion. You could survive a confrontation. But you couldn't survive being slowly erased. And that was his genius. The streets adjust to the new reality. By the end of the month, everyone understood the lesson. Don't rush. Don't challenge. Don't gamble. And above all, don't miss. John Gotti hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shown anger. Yet the city felt smaller, tighter, more controlled. But the FBI wasn't done. Because while Gotti was winning on the streets, they were changing the rules of the game. And what came next would trap him in a way force never could. The FBI finally understood something uncomfortable. They couldn't beat John Gotti by chasing violence. So they stopped chasing it. Instead, they listened. For years, agents had treated wiretaps as supporting evidence, something to strengthen a case already built. After the failed move on Gotti, that changed. Now, the wire was the case. Every laugh, every complaint, every careless word. They didn't need orders. They didn't need threats. They needed ego. And John Gotti had plenty of it. The one place Gotti felt safe. The Rave Night Social Club. To Gotti, it wasn't just a hangout. It was a throne room. He believed the walls were loyal. The room was his. What he didn't know was that microphones had become part of the furniture. Hidden in lamps. In walls. Under tables. And slowly, patiently, the FBI collected something priceless. John Gotti talking like a king. Complaining about subordinates. Mocking allies. Describing decisions. Not ordering. Not instructing. Just talking. And talking was enough. The psychological play. Agents noticed something fascinating. The more pressure Gotti felt from enemies, the more he talked. He vented. He boasted. He reassured himself out loud. It wasn't arrogance. It was relief. Talking made him feel powerful again. And the FBI let him feel that way. They didn't arrest him. They didn't confront him. They waited, turning the inner circle. At the same time, another strategy unfolded. They stopped threatening soldiers with prison. They threatened them with irrelevance. "You'll be forgotten," one agent told a man quietly. "He'll survive. You won't." That planted a seed. Loyalty built on fear is strong. But loyalty built on fear collapses when fear changes direction. One by one, doubts crept in. And one man listened longer than the rest. The FBI's real target. John Gotti wasn't the first target. He was the final one. The Bureau wanted someone who could explain the tapes, translate the tone, confirm the meaning. They didn't need dozens. They needed one. Someone close, trusted, involved. Someone who had heard the same voice, but now heard it differently. The net closes. By the time Gotti noticed something was off, it was too late. Meetings felt colder, conversations shorter, silence heavier. He sensed it, but he misread it. He thought fear was returning. In reality, control was slipping. John Gotti believed he had survived the storm. What he didn't see was that the storm had moved indoors. The arrest wasn't dramatic. No chase, no chaos, just handcuffs. For the first time in years, John Gotti wasn't smiling for cameras. The courtroom was different now. The jokes didn't land. The confidence felt rehearsed. And then the tapes played. His voice, clear, calm, damning, not shouting, not threatening, just speaking like a man who thought he was safe. The jury listened. So did the world. The final realization. Gotti finally understood. The gunmen weren't the real danger. The failed attempt hadn't weakened him. It had changed how the FBI hunted him. They didn't need blood. They didn't need chaos. They needed time. And he had given them all of it. The verdict: life. No parole. No escape. As the sentence was read, John Gotti didn't react. No anger. No tears. Just stillness. The same stillness he once used to control others. The legacy: John Gotti didn't fall because of fear. He fell because of comfort. Because he believed the room belonged to him. Because he believed silence worked both ways. It didn't. Gunmen tried to take down John Gotti. They failed. But what happened the next morning changed everything. Not with noise. Not with force. But with patience. And that lesson reshaped organized crime forever.